Welcome to No Sleep Historian, where the truth isn't buried in textbooks, it's bound in blood. Like and subscribe, because the past is darker than you were ever told. They weren't just read, they were feared, banned, burned, and in some cases, blamed for madness, murder, and mass death. These are the books that changed the world or ruined it. These are the most dangerous books ever written. Part 1. The Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible. In the depths of the Benedictine monastery of Podlavas in Bohemia, sometime in the early 13th century, a monk named Herman the Recluse embarked on what would become one of history's most extraordinary and terrifying literary endeavors. The result was the Codex Gigas, known today as the Devil's Bible, a manuscript so massive and mysterious that it has inspired centuries of dark legends and supernatural speculation. The Codex Gigas stands as the largest medieval manuscript ever created, measuring over 3 feet tall and weighing an astounding 165 pounds. Its 310 vellum pages, made from the skins of 160 donkeys, contain the complete Latin Bible alongside a collection of historical texts, medical formulas, exorcism rituals, and magical spells. But it is page 577 that has captured the imagination and terror of observers for 8 centuries. There, rendered in vivid reds and blacks, sits a full-page portrait of Satan himself, depicted as a horned, clawed beast with a serpentine tongue, crouched in a posture that seems to leap from the page. The legend surrounding the manuscript's creation is as dark as its contents. According to medieval chronicles, Herman the Recluse had been sentenced to be walled up alive for breaking his monastic vows. Facing this gruesome fate, he struck a bargain with his brothers. He promised to create a book that would glorify the monastery forever, containing all human knowledge, and he would complete this impossible task in a single night. As midnight approached and Herman realized the futility of his promise, he made another, more terrible bargain. He called upon Satan himself to help him complete the work in exchange for his soul. The devil accepted, and by dawn, the massive tome was complete. As a signature of their unholy pact, Satan's portrait was included, facing a page depicting the heavenly city, creating a visual representation of the eternal struggle between good and evil. Herman's soul was forfeit, but his monastery was spared, and the book that would become known as the Devil's Bible began its dark journey through history. Modern paleographic analysis suggests that Codex Gigas was indeed written by a single scribe over a period of 25 to 30 years, making Herman's overnight completion physically impossible. Yet this scientific explanation does little to diminish the manuscript's ominous reputation. The uniformity of the script throughout such a massive work is so remarkable that even today's experts struggle to explain how one person could maintain such consistency over decades of writing. The curse of the Codex Gigas manifested almost immediately. The monastery that commissioned it fell into decline shortly after its completion. The manuscript passed through various religious institutions, and each seemed to suffer misfortune. In 1594, it was acquired by Emperor Rudolf II, known for his obsession with the occult. Rudolf's reign was marked by political instability, religious conflict, and personal madness that eventually led to his deposition. The book's malevolent influence continued when it became part of the Swedish royal collection after the 30 Years' War. The Swedish court, once a beacon of Protestant power, began to experience a series of catastrophes. Queen Christina abdicated and converted to Catholicism, shocking Protestant Europe. Her successor, Charles X Gustaf, died mysteriously young, and subsequent Swedish monarchs faced military defeats and political turmoil. During the devastating fire that consumed Prague Castle in 1697, the Codex Gigas played a central role in one of the most bizarre incidents in the blaze's history. As flames engulfed the royal library, a single person reportedly threw the massive tome out of a window to save it from destruction. The book survived, but the person who saved it was found dead shortly after, with no apparent cause of death. Witnesses claimed the book had grown impossibly heavy during the fire, as if resisting salvation. The manuscript's reputation for bringing doom to its owners became so widespread that few institutions were willing to house it permanently. Scholars who studied it reported strange phenomena, including nightmares featuring the Satan portrait, unexplained illnesses, and in some cases, complete mental breakdowns. One 18th century researcher claimed that the devil's eyes in the portrait followed him around the room, and that he could hear whispering in languages he didn't recognize when he worked late into the night. The Codex Gigas contains more than just religious texts and demonic imagery. Hidden within its pages are medical remedies that modern analysis has shown to be surprisingly effective. Astronomical charts that demonstrate advanced knowledge of celestial movements, and historical chronicles that provide unique insights into medieval life. Some researchers suggest that the book represents a comprehensive encyclopedia of medieval knowledge, making its supposed overnight creation even more impossible and mysterious. Among the most disturbing elements of the manuscript are the exorcism rituals scattered throughout its pages. These aren't simple prayers or blessings, but detailed instructions for confronting and banishing demonic entities. Some of these rituals are unique to the Codex Gigas and don't appear in any other known medieval text. Modern occultists have claimed that these rituals are remarkably effective, though attempting them comes with severe risks. The psychological impact of the Satan portrait cannot be overstated. Medieval viewers would have had no context for such a vivid and detailed depiction of evil. The image violates numerous artistic conventions of the time, showing Satan not as a fallen angel or abstract symbol, but as a tangible, threatening presence. The portrait's placement facing the heavenly city creates a visual dialogue between salvation and damnation that would have been profoundly disturbing to medieval Christians. Today, the Codex Gigas resides in the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm, where it continues to fascinate and terrify visitors. The library reports unusual incidents around the manuscript, including electronic equipment failures, temperature fluctuations in its display room, and visitor complaints of feeling watched or followed after viewing the Satan portrait. Security cameras positioned near the manuscript have allegedly captured unexplained shadows and movements, though the library officially dismisses these as technical glitches. Modern scholars approach the Codex Gigas with a mixture of academic interest and superstitious caution, while they reject supernatural explanations for its creation and influence. Many acknowledge that the manuscript possesses an undeniable psychological power. The combination of its massive size, mysterious origins, and disturbing imagery creates an aura of menace that transcends rational explanation. The legend that finishing reading the Codex Gigas leads to madness persists to this day. Library records from the 19th and 20th centuries document several cases of researchers who claimed to have read the entire manuscript and subsequently suffered mental breakdowns. While modern psychology might explain these incidents as coincidental or psychosomatic, the pattern is striking enough to give even skeptical scholars pause. Part 2. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Witch Hunter's Handbook. In 1487, two Dominican friars published what would become one of history's most destructive books, a text that would fuel centuries of persecution, torture, and murder across Europe and beyond. The Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches, was ostensibly a theological treatise on the reality of witchcraft, but in practice, it served as a detailed manual for identifying, prosecuting, and executing suspected witches. Its publication marked the beginning of the systematic persecution that would claim hundreds of thousands of lives over the next 3 centuries. Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, the book's authors, were experienced inquisitors who had spent decades investigating allegations of witchcraft throughout the Holy Roman Empire. Their work emerged during a period of social upheaval, religious reformation, and widespread anxiety about the devil's influence in the world. The late 15th century saw increasing reports of maleficium, harmful magic, and church authorities were under pressure to provide clear guidance on how to address these supernatural threats. The Malleus Maleficarum was structured in 3 distinct parts, each serving a specific purpose in the machinery of persecution. The first section established the theological foundation for witch hunting by proving, through extensive biblical and philosophical arguments, that witches not only existed but posed an existential threat to Christian society. The authors argued that denying the reality of witchcraft was itself a form of heresy, effectively making skepticism a crime punishable by death. This theological framework was crucial because it transformed what had previously been folk beliefs and superstitions into official church doctrine. Before the Malleus Maleficarum, many church authorities had been skeptical of witchcraft accusations, viewing them as peasant ignorance or deliberate fraud. The book's scholarly approach and extensive citations from religious authorities gave witch hunting the intellectual respectability it needed to gain institutional support. The second section of the book detailed the various forms of witchcraft and their effects on society. Here, the authors cataloged a comprehensive taxonomy of magical practices, from love spells and weather magic to the more sinister accusations of child murder and demonic pacts. They provided graphic descriptions of witches' Sabbaths, where alleged practitioners would gather to worship Satan, engage in cannibalism, and plan attacks against Christian communities. Perhaps most significantly, this section established the connection between witchcraft and women. The authors argued that women were naturally more susceptible to demonic influence due to their supposedly weaker intellects and stronger sexual appetites. They claimed that women's emotional nature made them ideal targets for Satan's recruitment, and that female witches posed a particular threat because of their roles as mothers, healers, and community leaders. This gendered aspect of the Malleus Maleficarum had devastating consequences. While men were occasionally accused of witchcraft, the vast majority of victims were women, often those who were elderly, widowed, or otherwise marginalized. The book provided theological justification for what was essentially a war against female autonomy and knowledge, particularly targeting women who served as healers, midwives, or keepers of traditional folk wisdom. The third and most practically dangerous section of the Malleus Maleficarum provided detailed instructions for investigating, trying, and executing suspected witches. This part of the book read like a legal manual, complete with procedures for gathering evidence, conducting interrogations, and extracting confessions. The authors outlined techniques for overcoming the supernatural protections that witches allegedly possessed, including methods for preventing them from maintaining silence under torture. The book's approach to evidence was particularly insidious. The authors argued that witchcraft cases required different standards of proof than ordinary crimes, since the devil would naturally work to protect his servants by obscuring evidence. This logic allowed prosecutors to accept testimony that would be inadmissible in other cases, including hearsay, spectral evidence, and confessions extracted under extreme duress. The Malleus Maleficarum's treatment of torture was especially detailed and disturbing. The authors provided specific instructions for various forms of physical coercion, arguing that pain was necessary to break the demonic bonds that prevented witches from confessing their crimes. They outlined progressive escalation techniques, starting with threats and psychological pressure before moving to physical torture if confessions were not forthcoming. The book's influence spread rapidly throughout Europe, aided by the recent invention of the printing press. Within decades of its publication, the Malleus Maleficarum had been reprinted dozens of times and translated into multiple languages. It became the standard reference for witch hunters, inquisitors, and secular authorities dealing with witchcraft accusations. The book's scholarly tone and extensive religious citations gave it an authority that transcended national and religious boundaries. The practical application of the Malleus Maleficarum's principles led to some of the darkest chapters in European history. The witch trials that followed its publication were characterized by procedural irregularities, judicial corruption, and mass hysteria. Entire communities were torn apart by accusations and counter-accusations, as fear and paranoia created cycles of persecution that could continue for years. One of the most devastating aspects of the witch trials was their economic dimension. The Malleus Maleficarum included provisions for confiscating the property of convicted witches, creating powerful financial incentives for accusations and prosecutions. In many regions, witch hunting became a profitable enterprise, with authorities, informants, and executioners all benefiting from the systematic persecution of vulnerable individuals. The book's influence extended far beyond individual cases to shape legal systems and social attitudes throughout Europe. Many of the procedural innovations introduced in witch trials, including the use of torture, secret accusations, and presumptions of guilt, became standard features of early modern legal systems. The Malleus Maleficarum helped establish principles of jurisprudence that prioritized social order and religious orthodoxy over individual rights and due process. The geographic spread of which persecution followed the distribution of the Malleus Maleficarum with remarkable precision. Regions where the book was widely available and frequently cited experienced the most intense periods of witch hunting, while areas where it had less influence saw fewer prosecutions. The correlation between the book's presence and the severity of persecution provides compelling evidence of its direct causal role in the witch craze. The psychological impact of the Malleus Maleficarum on both accusers and accused was profound and lasting. The book's detailed descriptions of witchcraft created a shared vocabulary of supernatural fear that allowed communities to articulate anxieties about social change, economic hardship, and religious conflict. For many people, accusations of witchcraft became a way to explain misfortune and assign blame for problems that had no obvious natural causes. For those accused of witchcraft, the Malleus Maleficarum created an impossible situation. The The book's logic made denial of guilt evidence of demonic protection, while confession led inevitably to execution. This catch-22 situation meant that once accused, individuals had virtually no hope of acquittal. The psychological pressure of this situation led many innocent people to confess to crimes they had never committed, simply to end their suffering. The decline of witch persecution in the late 17th and early 18th centuries came about partly due to changing intellectual attitudes and partly due to recognition of the Malleus Maleficarum's fundamental flaws. Enlightenment thinkers began to question the book's assumptions about supernatural causation and female nature, while legal reformers criticized its procedural innovations as violations of natural justice. Modern scholarship has revealed the extent to which the Malleus Maleficarum was based on fabricated evidence and logical fallacies. The author's claims about witnessing supernatural phenomena have been discredited, and their theological arguments have been shown to contradict established church doctrine in numerous ways. The book stands today as a monument to the dangers of combining religious fanaticism with institutional power. Part 3. The Voynich Manuscript. The book no one can read. Deep within the archives of Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book Library sits one of history's most enigmatic texts, a 15th century manuscript that has confounded scholars, cryptographers, and linguists for over a century. The Voynich manuscript, named after the Polish book dealer who acquired it in 1912, consists of 240 vellum pages filled with an unknown script, bizarre illustrations, and diagrams that seem to depict impossible plants, astronomical phenomena, and human figures engaged in mysterious rituals. Despite the efforts of some of the world's most brilliant minds, the manuscript remains completely undeciphered, leading many to question whether it represents a lost language, an elaborate hoax, or something far stranger. Wilfrid Voynich discovered the manuscript in 1912 among a collection of books at the Villa Mondragon near Rome, a Jesuit college that was selling part of its library. The manuscript came with a letter dated 1665, written by Johannes Marcus Marci, rector of the University of Prague, to the famous Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kirchhoff. In the letter, Marci claimed that the mysterious book had once belonged to Emperor Rudolf II, who had purchased it for 600 gold ducats, believing it to be the work of the 13th century philosopher and scientist Roger Bacon. This attribution to Roger Bacon immediately elevated the manuscript's perceived importance. Bacon was known for his advanced scientific thinking and his interest in codes and secret knowledge. If the manuscript was indeed his work, it might contain revolutionary scientific discoveries or alchemical secrets that were too dangerous to record in plain text. However, subsequent analysis has dated the manuscript to the early 15th century, making Bacon's authorship impossible. The manuscript's text consists of approximately 35,000 words, written in an unknown script that resembles no known language or writing system. The characters appear to be alphabetic rather than pictographic, suggesting that they represent sounds rather than concepts. However, the statistical properties of the text are unlike any natural language. Some characters appear with unusual frequency, while others are extremely rare. Words seem to follow certain patterns, but these patterns don't match the structure of any known linguistic family. Professional cryptographers began studying the manuscript seriously during World War II, when code breaking was a matter of national security. William Friedman, one of America's leading cryptanalysts and the man who broke the Japanese diplomatic code before Pearl Harbor, spent decades trying to decipher the Voynich text. Despite his expertise and the assistance of teams of specialists, Friedman made no progress toward understanding the manuscript's meaning. The illustrations in the Voynich manuscript are as mysterious as its text. The botanical section contains detailed drawings of plants that don't correspond to any known species. Some appear to be fantastical combinations of different plant parts, while others seem to depict vegetation from alien worlds. Expert botanists have analyzed these illustrations extensively, but none have been able to identify the plants or understand their purpose. The astronomical section contains circular diagrams with stars, moons, and suns, along with what appear to be zodiacal symbols. Some researchers have suggested that these represent a unique astronomical system or calendar, possibly from a culture that observed different celestial phenomena than those familiar to European astronomers. However, the diagrams don't match any known astronomical traditions from around the world. Perhaps most disturbing are the biological sections, which show dozens of naked female figures bathing in pools of green liquid connected by an elaborate system of tubes and reservoirs. These images have been interpreted as everything from alchemical processes to medical treatments to ritual purification ceremonies. The women appear healthy and undistressed, but the purpose of their activities remains completely unclear. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Voynich manuscript is its psychological effect on researchers. Many scholars who have spent years studying the text report experiencing obsessive thoughts, vivid dreams featuring the manuscript's imagery, and a sense that they are on the verge of a breakthrough that never comes. Some have described feeling that the book is deliberately resisting comprehension, as if it were protecting its secrets through supernatural means. Dr. John Tiltman, a British cryptographer who worked on the manuscript in the 1950s, wrote about his experience with unusual candor. He described feeling that the text was almost but not quite familiar, as if he were trying to remember a language he had once known but forgotten. Tiltman reported having dreams in which he could read the manuscript perfectly, only to wake and find that the knowledge had evaporated. The manuscript's resistance to computer analysis has been particularly frustrating for modern researchers. Advanced statistical techniques that have successfully decoded other historical ciphers yield inconsistent results when applied to the Voynich text. Some algorithms suggest that the manuscript contains meaningful information, while others indicate that it might be elaborate nonsense. This ambiguity has led some researchers to propose that the manuscript was designed specifically to confound systematic analysis. Several researchers have claimed to have partially decoded the manuscript, but none of their solutions have withstood scrutiny. In 2017, a team of Canadian researchers announced that they had identified the manuscript's language as Hebrew, written in a complex cipher. Their translation produced what they claimed was a medieval treatise on women's health. However, experts in Hebrew and medieval medicine quickly pointed out numerous flaws in their methodology and translation. Another proposed solution came from a British academic who claimed that the manuscript was written in a previously unknown form of Turkish. His analysis suggested that the text described herbal remedies and astronomical observations. However, Turkish language experts and historians found his interpretation unconvincing, noting that the proposed language bore little resemblance to any known form of Turkish. The possibility that the Voynich manuscript is an elaborate hoax has been seriously considered by researchers. Some argue that it could be the work of a clever forger attempting to create a mysterious book that would fetch a high price from collectors interested in esoteric knowledge. The statistical properties of the text could be explained if it were generated using some kind of systematic method that produced the appearance of language without actual meaning. However, the hoax theory faces significant challenges. The manuscript's creation would have required extensive knowledge of medieval bookmaking techniques, including the preparation of vellum, the mixing of period-appropriate inks, and the use of authentic binding materials. Carbon dating has confirmed that the vellum dates to the early 15th century, and microscopic analysis of the inks suggests that they are consistent with medieval formulations. More importantly, creating a convincing fake language with consistent internal rules would have been an extraordinarily sophisticated undertaking for a medieval or Renaissance forger. The text shows subtle patterns and regularities that suggest genuine linguistic structure. Even if that structure doesn't match any known language family, the level of complexity and consistency required would have been extremely difficult to achieve without modern understanding of linguistics and statistics. The manuscript's historical provenance adds another layer of mystery. The documented ownership trail extends back to Emperor Rudolf II, who was known for his interest in the occult and his willingness to pay enormous sums for mysterious artifacts. Rudolf's court included many of the leading scholars and alchemists of his time, including John Dee, the English mathematician and mystic who claimed to communicate with angels through coded messages. Some researchers have speculated that the Voynich manuscript might be connected to the tradition of artificial languages created by medieval and Renaissance scholars for esoteric purposes. These languages were sometimes used to record alchemical or magical knowledge that was too dangerous to write in vernacular languages. The manuscript's influence on popular culture has grown significantly in recent decades, particularly with the rise of internet communities dedicated to solving its mystery. Amateur cryptographers from around the world have proposed thousands of potential solutions, ranging from the plausible to the fantastical. Some claim that the manuscript contains predictions of future events, while others argue that it describes technologies far in advance of its time. Recent advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning have opened new possibilities for analyzing the Voynich manuscript. Researchers have begun applying neural networks and other AI tools to identify patterns that might be invisible to human analysis, but the nature of that information remains unclear. The psychological impact of the Voynich manuscript extends beyond individual researchers to the broader academic community. The book has become a symbol of the limits of human knowledge and the persistence of mystery in an age of scientific rationalism. Its continued resistance to explanation challenges assumptions about the power of modern analytical techniques and the inevitability of intellectual progress. Part 4. The Grand Grimoire, the text that summons Lucifer. Among the most feared occult texts ever written, the Grand Grimoire stands as perhaps history's most dangerous magical manual, a book allegedly capable of summoning Lucifer himself and granting its practitioners dominion over the forces of hell, also known as the Red Dragon or the Gospel of Satan. This 18th century grimoire claims to contain the secret methods by which King Solomon controlled demons and spirits, along with detailed instructions for making pacts with the devil and commanding legions of infernal beings. For centuries, the mere possession of this book was considered grounds for execution, and even today, occultists approach it with extreme caution, believing that its rituals can open doorways to realms that should remain forever sealed. The Grand Grimoire first appeared in France during the mid-18th century, though its origins are shrouded in mystery and conflicting legends. According to the text itself, the book was written in 1522 by one Alabec, the Egyptian, working under the direction of Lucifuge Rofocail, Lucifer's prime minister in hell. This supernatural dictation supposedly took place in a hidden chamber beneath the Vatican, where a possessed monk transcribed the devil's own words, while papal exorcists battled to prevent the infernal revelation from reaching completion. The historical reality is somewhat different, though no less intriguing. Scholars believe the Grand Grimoire was compiled by an unknown French occultist who drew upon much older magical traditions, including the Key of Solomon, the Testament of Solomon, and various medieval grimoires that had circulated in manuscript form for centuries. The book represents a synthesis of Jewish Kabbalah, Christian mysticism, and pagan magical practices, combined with elements that appear to be entirely original and disturbingly effective. The Grand Grimoire is structured as a practical manual for summoning and controlling demonic entities. It begins with the fundamental premise that Lucifer, despite his fall from grace, retains authority over vast legions of spirits and can grant earthly power to those bold enough to seek his alliance. Unlike other grimoires that focus on protective magic or beneficial spirits, the Grand Grimoire explicitly embraces the dark side of the supernatural world, promising its readers wealth, power, and forbidden knowledge in exchange for their souls. The book's most infamous section details the ritual for summoning Lucifer himself, a ceremony known as the Great Invocation. This ritual requires extensive preparation, including a period of fasting, the construction of a magic circle using specific materials including virgin parchment and black candles made from human fat, and the performance of blasphemous acts designed to demonstrate the practitioner's rejection of divine authority. The summoning must take place at midnight on a Tuesday during the dark of the moon, in a location where no Christian prayers have ever been spoken. According to the text, Lucifer will appear to the summoner in whatever form he chooses, though usually as a handsome young man dressed in red and black. The Grand Grimoire provides detailed scripts for negotiating with the devil, including specific phrases that must be spoken to avoid being instantly destroyed by his presence. The book warns that Lucifer is a master of deception who will attempt to claim the summoner's soul immediately, and provides counterspells and protective measures to prevent this outcome. The pact-making process described in the Grand Grimoire is elaborate and terrifying. The practitioner must write their agreement with Lucifer using their own blood on parchment made from the skin of an unbaptized child. The contract must specify exactly what the summoner desires in exchange for their soul, with the understanding that Lucifer will interpret the terms as literally and maliciously as possible. The book includes sample contracts for various purposes, including gaining wealth, achieving political power, winning love, and obtaining magical abilities. Once the pact is signed, the Grand Grimoire describes how the new devil worshipper can summon lesser demons to carry out their wishes. The book contains detailed descriptions of dozens of infernal spirits, each with their own specialties and methods of summoning. Some demons are said to excel at causing discord and war, others at bringing disease and death, and still others at revealing hidden treasures or secret knowledge. The grimoire provides the specific incantations, offerings, and ritual tools required to compel each demon's obedience. The practical instructions in the Grand Grimoire are remarkably detailed and specific, suggesting that its author had extensive experience with occult practices. The book describes how to create magical instruments, including wands made from hazelwood cut at dawn, pentacles inscribed on virgin metal, and incense blended from exotic herbs and human remains. It provides recipes for oils and powders that supposedly enhance magical power, along with instructions for consecrating these materials through rituals that involve disturbing acts of sacrilege. Historical accounts of the Grand Grimoire's effects on its readers make for disturbing reading. French police records from the 18th and 19th centuries contain numerous reports of individuals who claimed to have successfully performed the book's rituals, only to suffer mysterious deaths or complete mental breakdowns. In 1784, a young nobleman named Jacques de Malle attempted the Great Invocation in his chateau near Paris. Servants reported seeing strange lights and hearing inhuman voices emanating from his study. De Malle was found dead the next morning, his body unmarked, but his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The French Revolution saw a surge of interest in occult practices as traditional religious and social structures collapsed. Several revolutionary leaders were rumored to possess copies of the Grand Grimoire, and some historians suggest that the unprecedented violence of the Terror was influenced by demonic forces unleashed through the book's rituals. Robespierre himself was said to carry a pocket edition of the grimoire, though this claim remains unverified. The Catholic Church's response to the Grand Grimoire was swift and uncompromising. Pope Pius VI issued a papal bull in 1791 declaring that mere possession of the book constituted a mortal sin, and authorized the Inquisition to use any means necessary to locate and destroy copies. The Vatican's secret archives allegedly contain detailed records of exorcisms performed on individuals who had read the grimoire, along with testimonies from priests who claimed to have witnessed supernatural phenomena during these ceremonies. Despite the Church's efforts, copies of the Grand Grimoire continued to circulate throughout Europe and eventually reached the Americas. The book played a significant role in the development of various occult traditions, including Haitian Voodoo, where it was incorporated into existing African magical practices to create new forms of sorcery. In New Orleans, Marie Laveau, the famous Voodoo queen, was said to own one of only 7 authentic copies of the grimoire in North America. The 19th century saw the emergence of several notorious occultists who claimed to derive their power from the Grand Grimoire. Eliphas, the French magician who helped popularize modern occultism, wrote extensively about the book, though he claimed never to have performed its most dangerous rituals. Aleister Crowley, perhaps the most famous occultist of the 20th century, acknowledged the grimoire's power while warning that its methods were too perilous for any but the most experienced practitioners. Modern occultists continue to regard the Grand Grimoire with a mixture of fascination and terror. Unlike other magical texts that are studied primarily for their historical or philosophical value, the grimoire is still used by practitioners who believe in its effectiveness. Contemporary reports of successful demon summoning using the book's methods continue to surface, though they are impossible to verify and often come from individuals whose reliability is questionable. The psychological impact of the Grand Grimoire cannot be underestimated. The book's explicit embrace of evil and its detailed instructions for committing acts of sacrilege create a powerful psychological transformation in readers. Even those who approach the text with skeptical intentions often report feeling drawn into its worldview, experiencing vivid dreams of demonic encounters, and developing obsessive thoughts about performing its rituals. Several academic studies have examined the Grand Grimoire's influence on individuals and society. Psychologists note that the book's combination of transgressive content and elaborate ritual instructions can trigger profound psychological changes, particularly in individuals already prone to magical thinking or dissociative experiences. The book seems designed to break down the reader's normal psychological defenses and replace the Grand Grimoire's continued circulation in the digital age has raised new concerns about its potential impact. Online communities dedicated to practicing the book's rituals have emerged, sharing experiences and modifications of the traditional ceremonies. Some members of these communities report achieving the results promised by the grimoire, while others describe terrifying encounters with entities that they cannot control or banish. Law enforcement agencies in several countries have noted correlations between possession of the Grand Grimoire and various forms of criminal activity, while no direct causal relationship has been established. Investigators have found copies of the book in connection with cases involving ritual abuse, multiple murders, and other crimes that suggest supernatural influence. The book's emphasis on transgressing moral boundaries appears to have a disinhibiting effect on some readers. The Vatican maintains that the Grand Grimoire remains one of the most dangerous books ever written and continues to advocate for its complete suppression. Modern exorcists report that individuals who have read the book are particularly difficult to help, as the grimoire seems to create lasting spiritual damage that resists conventional religious intervention. The Church's official position is that the book serves as a genuine conduit for demonic influence and should be avoided at all costs. Part 5. Main Camps, the Blueprint of Genocide. In the cramped confines of Landsberg prison in 1924, a failed Austrian artist and political agitator began dictating what would become the most destructive political text in human history. Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf was initially conceived as a personal memoir and political manifesto, but it evolved into something far more sinister, a detailed blueprint for racial genocide, territorial conquest, and the complete reorganization of European civilization. The book's impact on the 20th century was catastrophic, providing the ideological foundation for World War II and the Holocaust, while its continued influence in the 21st century demonstrates the persistent power of hateful ideas to corrupt human societies. Hitler began dictating Mein Kampf to his fellow prisoner and devoted follower Rudolf Hess during the 8 months he spent in Landsberg following his failed beer hall putsch in Munich. Initially titled 4.5 Years of Struggle Against Lies, Stupidity, and Cowardice. The book was intended to explain Hitler's personal transformation from an obscure, failed artist to the leader of a revolutionary political movement. However, the text quickly expanded beyond autobiography to encompass Hitler's complete worldview, including his theories on race, politics, history, and Germany's destiny. The first volume of Mein Kampf was published in 1925, followed by a second volume in 1926. Initially, the book sold poorly, with many Germans dismissing Hitler as a fringe extremist whose ideas were too radical for mainstream acceptance. Early reviews were largely negative, with critics pointing out the text's rambling structure, crude prose style, and obviously fantastical claims about Jewish conspiracies and Aryan superiority. few observers recognized that they were reading a literal blueprint for future genocide. Mein Kampf's central thesis rested on Hitler's racial theory, which divided humanity into a hierarchy of races with Germanic Aryans at the top and Jews at the bottom, according to Hitler's pseudo-scientific framework. History was essentially a struggle between races for survival and dominance, with the superior races destined to rule over or eliminate their inferiors. This biological determinism provided a seemingly rational foundation for policies that would later result in the systematic murder of millions of people. The book's treatment of Jews was particularly venomous and detailed. Hitler portrayed Jews not merely as an inferior race, but as a parasitic force that threatened the very existence of Aryan civilization. He claimed that Jews were incapable of creating genuine culture or civilization, but instead survived by infiltrating and corrupting the societies built by superior races. This portrayal of Jews as both subhuman and dangerously powerful created a cognitive framework that would later justify both persecution and extermination. Hitler's anti-Semitic theories in Mein Kampf drew upon centuries of European anti-Jewish sentiment, while adding modern pseudo-scientific elements that gave ancient prejudices a veneer of rational respectability. He claimed that Jewish influence could be detected in everything from modern art and literature to democratic politics and international finance, by presenting anti-Semitism as a form of scientific understanding rather than mere prejudice. Hitler made it easier for educated Germans to embrace genocidal policies. The book also outlined Hitler's geopolitical vision, which centered on the concept of Lebensraum, or living space. According to this theory, Germany's growing population required additional territory to ensure the nation's survival and prosperity. Hitler argued that this living space must be taken from the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe, who he characterized as racially inferior and therefore unworthy of the lands they occupied. This territorial ambition would later drive Germany's invasion of Poland, the Soviet Union, and other Eastern European nations. Mein Kampf's discussion of propaganda techniques was particularly sophisticated and influential. Hitler demonstrated a clear understanding of mass psychology and the methods by which public opinion could be manipulated. He argued that propaganda must be simple, repetitive, and emotional rather than rational, targeting the masses rather than intellectuals. The book outlined specific techniques for using repetition, scapegoating, and appeals to nationalism that would later be employed with devastating effectiveness by the Nazi regime. The text revealed Hitler's contempt for democratic institutions and his belief that strong leadership required the concentration of power in a single individual. He argued that democracy was a Jewish invention designed to weaken Aryan nations by preventing decisive action and encouraging internal conflict. In place of democratic governance, Hitler advocated for the Führerprinzip, or leadership principle, under which all authority would flow from a supreme leader whose will would be absolute and unquestionable. Hitler's analysis of Germany's defeat in World War I, presented in Mein Kampf, established many of the myths that would later fuel Nazi ideology. He claimed that Germany had not been defeated militarily, but had been betrayed by internal enemies, particularly Jews and Marxists, who had undermined the war effort through revolution and surrender. This stab-in-the-back legend provided a convenient explanation for Germany's humiliation while identifying scapegoats who could be blamed for the nation's problems. The book's treatment of violence was explicit and unapologetic. Hitler argued that violence was a natural and necessary tool of political action, and that pacifism was a weakness that superior races could not afford. He praised the use of force in achieving political objectives and suggested that the willingness to employ violence was a mark of racial superiority. This glorification of violence would later manifest in the systematic brutality of the Nazi regime. As the Nazi Party gained political power in the late 1920s and early 1930s, sales of Mein Kampf increased dramatically. The book became required reading for Nazi Party members and was widely distributed in schools, workplaces, and military units. By 1933, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, Mein Kampf was being treated as a sacred text by millions of Germans who saw it as a guide to their nation's destiny. The implementation of Mein Kampf's ideas began almost immediately after Hitler's rise to power. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 codified the racial theories outlined in the book, stripping Jews of their citizenship and civil rights. The systematic persecution of Jews, Roma, disabled individuals, and other groups deemed racially inferior followed the blueprint laid out in Hitler's text with horrifying precision. The book's influence extended far beyond Germany's borders. Translations appeared in multiple languages, and fascist movements throughout Europe and beyond adopted many of Hitler's ideas about race, nationalism, and political organization. Even in countries that opposed Nazi Germany, Mein Kampf was studied by military and political leaders seeking to understand their enemies' motivations and strategies. The Holocaust, which resulted in the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims, represented the ultimate implementation of Mein Kampf's racial ideology. The industrial scale of the genocide, with its elaborate infrastructure of ghettos, deportation systems, and extermination camps, reflected the methodical approach to racial elimination that Hitler had outlined in his book decades earlier. World War II itself can be understood as the direct result of the geopolitical vision presented in Mein Kampf. Hitler's invasions of Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and the Soviet Union followed the territorial expansion strategy he had detailed in the book. The war's unprecedented scale and brutality reflected the total war philosophy that Hitler had advocated as necessary for racial survival. After Germany's defeat in 1945, the Allied powers were faced with the question of what to do with Mein Kampf. The book was banned in Germany and many other countries, with possession sometimes carrying criminal penalties. However, complete suppression proved impossible, and copies continued to circulate underground. The book's status as forbidden literature only enhanced its appeal to extremist groups and individuals attracted to Hitler's ideas. The copyright to Mein Kampf was held by the state of Bavaria, which used its legal authority to prevent new editions and translations for decades after the war. This approach was intended to limit the book's influence, while allowing scholars to study existing copies for historical research. However, the copyright expired in 2015, leading to renewed debates about the book's publication and distribution. Modern academic editions of Mein Kampf, published with extensive annotations and historical context, have attempted to present the text as a historical document while emphasizing its factual errors, logical contradictions, and moral bankruptcy. These scholarly editions serve an important educational purpose by helping readers understand how extremist ideologies develop and spread, while making clear the devastating consequences of Hitler's ideas. The book's continued influence in the 21st century is deeply troubling. Neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups around the world continue to treat Mein Kampf as an inspirational text, and excerpts from the book frequently appear in the manifestos of individuals who commit racially motivated violence. The rise of internet communication has made the book more accessible than ever, allowing its poisonous ideas to spread to new audiences. Studies of online extremist communities have shown that Mein Kampf remains one of the most frequently cited texts among individuals radicalized toward violence. The book's combination of pseudoscientific racial theory, historical mythology, and practical political advice continues to provide a template for modern hate movements, seeking to justify discrimination and violence against minority groups. Educational institutions worldwide grapple with the challenge of teaching about Mein Kampf and its impact without inadvertently promoting its ideas. Holocaust education programs often include excerpts from the book to help students understand the ideological foundations of genocide. But these educational uses must be carefully structured to prevent misinterpretation or glorification of Hitler's message. The psychological appeal of Mein Kampf to certain individuals remains a subject of scholarly investigation. The book's promise of simple explanations for complex problems, its identification of clear enemies to blame for social difficulties, and its promise of eventual triumph over adversity continue to attract people seeking meaning and purpose in their lives. Understanding these psychological mechanisms is crucial for preventing future genocides and combating contemporary extremism. Legal battles over Mein Kampf continue in various jurisdictions, with authorities attempting to balance free speech principles against the need to prevent the spread of genocidal ideology. Some countries maintain complete bans on the book, while others allow its distribution with restrictions or educational annotations. These legal approaches reflect ongoing disagreements about how democratic societies should respond to dangerous ideas. The digital age has created new challenges in controlling the distribution of Mein Kampf. The book is freely available on numerous websites and file-sharing platforms, making traditional censorship approaches largely ineffective. Social media platforms and search engines have implemented various measures to limit the book's visibility, but determined individuals can still easily access the complete text. Contemporary historians emphasize that Mein Kampf should be understood not as the ravings of a madman, but as a calculated political document that successfully mobilized millions of people toward genocidal goals. The book's effectiveness in translating abstract racial theories into concrete political action demonstrates the practical power of ideological texts to shape human behavior on a massive scale. The lessons of Mein Kampf extend far beyond the specific historical context of Nazi Germany. The book serves as a warning about the potential for seemingly civilized societies to embrace extremist ideologies when faced with economic hardship, social disruption, and political instability. Its continued relevance in understanding contemporary forms of authoritarianism and genocide makes it an essential, if disturbing, historical document. Modern genocide prevention efforts often reference Mein Kampf as an example of how written texts can serve as early warning signs of impending mass violence. The book's detailed blueprint for persecution and extermination demonstrates that genocide is rarely spontaneous but typically involves extensive planning and ideological preparation that leaves documentary evidence for those trained to recognize it. The ultimate lesson of Mein Kampf may be that ideas have consequences and that seemingly abstract theories about race, politics, and history can translate into real-world violence on an unprecedented scale. The book stands as a permanent reminder of humanity's capacity for evil when guided by toxic ideologies, and of the urgent necessity for vigilance against the forces that would divide people against each other based on race, religion, or nationality. Part 6. The Book of Soyga, the manuscript that drove John Dee mad. In the shadowy corridors of Elizabethan England, where science and sorcery danced their dangerous waltz, one man stood at the crossroads of both worlds. Dr. John Dee, mathematician, astronomer, and Queen Elizabeth I's most trusted advisor on matters both earthly and divine. But even this brilliant mind, capable of calculating the movements of celestial bodies and advising monarchs, would meet its match in a single terrible book, the Book of Soyga, also known as Alderaya Siv Soyga Voker. First appeared in Dee's personal library sometime in the 1580s. Its origins remain shrouded in mystery, though most scholars believe it was compiled in the late medieval period, possibly in the 14th or 15th centuries. The manuscript's very name sparked debate among occultists and scholars alike. Some claimed Soyga was Agios, spelled backward, the Greek word for holy. Others whispered it was an anagram of Agios, twisted and corrupted to suggest something far more sinister. What made this book so extraordinary and so terrifying was its contents. Unlike typical grimoires filled with crude spells and folk magic, the Book of Soyga presented itself as a sophisticated treatise on angelic magic and divine communication. It contained detailed instructions for contacting angels, tables of angelic names arranged in complex geometric patterns, and most disturbing of all, prophecies about the end of the world, delivered through what the text claimed were direct revelations from celestial beings. The manuscript was divided into several sections, each more bewildering than the last. The first portion dealt with angelic hierarchies, providing elaborate charts showing the ranks and names of various spiritual entities. These weren't the familiar archangels of Christian tradition, but beings with names that seemed to follow no earthly linguistic pattern. The text claimed these entities controlled everything from the weather to human destiny, and that proper communication with them could grant unimaginable power. But it was the second section that truly captured Dee's attention and perhaps sealed his fate. Here lay the book's most mysterious feature: 36 tables of seemingly random letters arranged in perfect squares. Each table contained exactly 36 rows and 36 columns, creating a grid of 1,296 letters that appeared to follow no discernible pattern. The manuscript claimed these tables contained the true names of angels and demons, hidden in a code that only the purest of heart and sharpest of mind could decipher. For years, Dee labored over these tables, applying every mathematical and cryptographic technique he knew. He was, after all, one of the most brilliant mathematicians of his age, a man who had advised navigators on oceanic voyages and helped design more accurate maps than had ever existed. If anyone could crack the code, it would be him. But the tables seemed to mock his efforts, revealing tantalizing patterns that dissolved into chaos the moment he thought he understood them. The third section proved even more disturbing. Here, the anonymous author provided detailed accounts of apocalyptic visions, describing the end of the world in vivid, terrifying detail. Unlike the symbolic prophecies found in the Book of Revelation, these visions were specific, naming dates, locations, and individuals. The text claimed these prophecies came directly from the angel Uriel, and that understanding them was crucial for humanity's survival. As Dee delved deeper into the manuscript, his behavior began to change. Colleagues noted that the once sociable scholar became increasingly reclusive, spending days locked in his study with the mysterious book. His normally meticulous scientific notes became erratic, filled with strange symbols and half-formed theories about angelic communication. He began to claim that the book was teaching him a new form of mathematics, one based not on human logic, but on divine principles that transcended earthly understanding. The turning point came when Dee decided he needed supernatural assistance to unlock the book's secrets. In 1582, he began working with Edward Kelly, a controversial figure who claimed to possess the ability to communicate directly with angels through scrying, the practice of gazing into crystal balls or mirrors to receive divine visions. Together, they embarked on a series of designed to contact the very angels named in the Book of Soiga. What happened next has been the subject of debate for over 4 centuries. According to Dee's detailed records, during one of their sessions, the angel Uriel appeared and revealed that the Book of Soiga was indeed genuine, containing secrets that were reserved unto the last times. But Uriel also delivered a chilling warning. He claimed that the book's mysteries could only be fully understood by the Archangel Michael himself, and that mortal minds attempting to comprehend its deepest secrets risked madness or worse. Despite this warning, or perhaps because of it, Dee pressed forward with his research. He became convinced that the book contained the key to understanding God's plan for the universe, and that he had been chosen to decode its mysteries. His journals from this period make for disturbing reading, filled with increasingly paranoid observations about enemies seeking to steal the book and references to visions that seemed to blend waking reality with nightmare. The Book of Soiga's influence on Dee extended beyond mere obsession. It fundamentally altered his approach to knowledge itself. Where once he had been a rational scholar who applied rigorous methodology to his studies, he now began to accept claims based solely on their supposed divine origin. This shift had real-world consequences. His advice to Queen Elizabeth became increasingly erratic, mixing sound mathematical calculations with prophetic warnings derived from his interpretation of the book's cryptic tables. Perhaps most tellingly, Dee's later years were marked by financial ruin and social isolation. The man who had once been one of England's most respected intellectuals found himself dismissed as a dangerous eccentric. His library, once considered one of the finest in Europe, was ransacked by superstitious neighbors who believed it contained diabolic texts. Many of his books were destroyed, though the Book of Soiga somehow survived. The manuscript's impact didn't end with Dee's death in 1608. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, copies circulated among occultists and scholars, each seemingly drawn to the challenge of decoding its mysterious tables. Several notable figures attempted to unlock its secrets, including the philosopher Gottfried Leibniz, who theorized that the tables might represent an early form of binary code. However, modern computational analysis has revealed that the tables are likely random letter arrangements, providing no hidden message beyond what the human mind desperately wants to find. This revelation raises disturbing questions about the nature of the book's power. If the tables truly are meaningless, then the Book of Soiga's influence stems not from any genuine occult knowledge, but from humanity's desperate desire to find patterns and meaning in chaos. The book becomes a mirror, reflecting back the observer's own need to believe in hidden truths and secret knowledge. Today, only a handful of copies of the Book of Soyga survive, housed in libraries and private collections around the world. Scholars who have studied it describe a peculiar psychological effect, even knowing that the tables are likely meaningless. Researchers report becoming obsessed with finding patterns, convinced that they are on the verge of a breakthrough that never comes. It's as if the book possesses an inherent ability to trap brilliant minds in cycles of futile analysis. The tragedy of John Dee serves as a warning about the seductive power of forbidden knowledge. Here was a man of genuine intellectual achievement, someone who contributed significantly to mathematics, astronomy, and navigation. Yet his encounter with the Book of Soyga transformed him from a rational scholar into a broken mystic, convinced that he alone possessed the key to cosmic mysteries that may never have existed at all. Part 7. The Necronomicon, When Fiction Becomes Ritual. In 1924, a struggling writer named Howard Phillips Lovecraft sat in his cramped Providence apartment, crafting tales of cosmic horror that would forever change the landscape of supernatural fiction. Among his many innovations was the creation of the Necronomicon, a fictional grimoire of unspeakable power that appeared throughout his stories as the ultimate repository of forbidden knowledge. Lovecraft never intended his imaginary book to become real. He could never have predicted that his literary creation would inspire genuine occult practices, drive readers to madness, and blur the line between fiction and reality in ways that continue to this day. The Necronomicon first appeared in Lovecraft's 1924 short story, The Hound, though he had been developing the concept for some time. In Lovecraft's mythology, the book was written in Damascus around 730 AD by a mad Arab poet named Abdul al-Hazard. According to the fictional history Lovecraft created, Alhazard spent years wandering the empty quarter of Arabia, studying ruins older than human civilization and learning secrets that drove him insane. The resulting tome, originally titled Al-Azif, supposedly meaning the howling of demons, contained detailed information about the Old Ones, ancient cosmic entities that ruled the earth before humanity and would one day return to reclaim it. Lovecraft's genius lay in the meticulous detail with which he constructed the Necronomicon's fictional history. He described how the book was translated into Greek by Theodorus Philadas in 950 AD, then into Latin by Alois Wormius in 1228. He claimed that the Catholic Church banned it in 1232, and that only 5 copies of the Latin translation survived into the modern era. These copies were supposedly housed in the British Museum, the National in Paris, Widener Library at Harvard, the University of Buenos Aires, and the private collection of a mysterious collector. What made the Necronomicon particularly compelling in Lovecraft's stories was not just its content, but the effect it had on those who read it. Characters who encountered the book invariably suffered terrible fates, driven mad by revelations about humanity's cosmic insignificance and the horrible truths hidden behind the veil of reality. The book didn't just contain spells or rituals. It contained a worldview so alien and terrifying that human minds couldn't process it without breaking. Lovecraft deliberately made his fictional grimoire feel authentic by grounding it in real occult traditions and historical contexts. He borrowed terminology from genuine magical texts, referenced actual historical figures, and embedded the Necronomicon within a broader mythology that included other fictional books like the Akkadic manuscripts and the Book of Eibon. This attention to detail made the Necronomicon feel more real than than many actual historical grimoires. The transformation from fiction to alleged reality began almost immediately after Lovecraft's stories gained popularity. In the 1930s and 1940s, readers began writing to bookstores and libraries requesting copies of the Necronomicon, convinced that such a detailed description must be based on a real book. Librarians at Harvard's Widener Library reported frequent inquiries about their supposed copy, leading them to eventually create a humorous card catalog entry for the non-existent volume. The situation became more complex in the 1960s and 1970s, when the counterculture movement and renewed interest in occultism coincided with a surge in Lovecraft's popularity. Young occultists, many of whom had grown up reading Lovecraft's stories, began to wonder whether the author had been describing a real book while pretending it was fiction. This speculation was fueled by the fact that Lovecraft had incorporated genuine occult knowledge into his stories, suggesting to some that he might have had access to authentic esoteric texts. The first serious attempt to create a real Necronomicon came in 1977, when a mysterious figure known only as Simon published the Necronomicon through Avon Books. This version claimed to be based on ancient Mesopotamian sources and presented itself as a genuine grimoire rather than a work of fiction. Simon's Necronomicon drew heavily from Sumerian and Babylonian mythology, presenting rituals for summoning ancient gods and accessing otherworldly powers. What made Simon's version particularly disturbing was its detailed ritual instructions and the psychological framework it provided for understanding Lovecraft's cosmic horror as literal truth. The book didn't just present spells. It offered a complete cosmology that reframed human existence as a brief interlude between periods of rule by ancient, incomprehensible entities. For readers already predisposed to believe in occult forces, this provided a compelling and terrifying worldview. The publication of Simon's Necronomicon opened the floodgates. Dozens of other versions followed, each claiming greater authenticity than the last. Some authors asserted that they had discovered fragments of the original Abdul al-Hazard manuscript. Others claimed to have received the text through supernatural revelation or channeling. Sessions with entities from Lovecraft's pantheon. Each version incorporated different occult traditions, from medieval grimoires to chaos magic to Aleister Crowley's Thelemic system. The proliferation of Necronomicon versions created a feedback loop that further blurred the line between fiction and reality. Practitioners began reporting genuine supernatural experiences while working with these texts, regardless of their fictional origins. Some claimed to have successfully summoned Lovecraftian entities like Cthulhu or Nyarlathotep. Others reported prophetic dreams, out-of-body experiences, or contact with otherworldly intelligences. These reports might be dismissed as mere fantasy, except for the consistency of certain experiences across different practitioners working with different versions of the text. Multiple individuals have reported similar types of nightmares after working with Necronomicon rituals, often involving vast underwater cities or cosmic entities of impossible geometry. Some practitioners have suffered what appear to be genuine psychological breakdowns, developing symptoms that mirror those described in Lovecraft's stories about characters who encountered the book. The academic study of these phenomena has revealed disturbing patterns. Dr. Robert Price, a biblical scholar and Lovecraft expert, has documented numerous cases of individuals who became obsessed with finding or creating authentic versions of the Necronomicon. Many of these people showed signs of what he terms fictional displacement, a condition where individuals begin to treat fictional narratives as literal truth. More troubling are the criminal cases that have involved references to the Necronomicon. In 1988, a teenager named Sean Sellers murdered his parents and a convenience store clerk, later claiming that he was following instructions from the Necronomicon to gain power from ancient gods. While Sellers' mental state was clearly disturbed regardless of any book's influence, the case highlighted how Lovecraft's fictional creation had taken on a life of its own in certain disturbed minds. The internet age has accelerated the Necronomicon's transformation from fiction to pseudo-reality. Online forums dedicated to Lovecraftian magic attract thousands of practitioners who share rituals, experiences, and theories about the book's authenticity. Others assert that the book exists in the collective unconscious and can be accessed through meditation and ritual practice. Perhaps most disturbing is the emergence of what researchers call Necronomicon cults, groups that have organized around the belief that Lovecraft's fictional entities are real and that the proper performance of Necronomicon rituals can establish contact with them. These groups often combine elements from various published versions of the book with their own innovations, creating hybrid belief systems that blur multiple occult traditions. The psychological appeal of the Necronomicon phenomenon extends beyond simple occult belief. In an age of scientific materialism and existential uncertainty, Lovecraft's cosmic horror offers a perverse form of meaning. Then individual suffering and global chaos become part of a larger cosmic pattern rather than random meaninglessness. The Necronomicon provides a framework for understanding the world's horrors as evidence of deeper truths rather than simple randomness. This psychological function explains why the book continues to attract new practitioners, despite its obviously fictional origins. For many people, the question of whether the Necronomicon is real becomes irrelevant. What matters is that it provides a coherent system for understanding reality that feels more authentic than conventional religious or scientific worldviews. The Necronomicon phenomenon also reflects broader questions about the nature of religious and magical belief. If enough people believe in something and act as if it's real, does its original fictional status matter? Some chaos magicians argue that the Necronomicon has become real through the collective belief and ritual practice of its adherents, regardless of its origins in Lovecraft's imagination. From an anthropological perspective, the Necronomicon represents a unique form of modern myth-making. Unlike traditional religious texts that claim divine revelation or ancient wisdom, the Necronomicon acknowledges its fictional origins while simultaneously transcending them. This creates a paradoxical situation where practitioners can simultaneously know that something is fictional and believe in its reality. The continuing evolution of Necronomicon traditions shows no signs of slowing. New versions appear regularly, each claiming to correct the errors or limitations of previous editions. Online communities continue to develop new rituals and interpretations. Some groups have begun incorporating virtual reality and artificial intelligence into their practices, creating digital grimoires that adapt to individual practitioners. The ultimate irony of the Necronomicon phenomenon is that it has achieved exactly what Lovecraft intended it to represent in his stories, but in reverse. Instead of a genuine ancient text that drives readers mad with forbidden knowledge, we have a modern fiction that has driven readers to create their own forbidden knowledge. The book has become a self-fulfilling prophecy, generating the very mysteries and dangers that its fictional version was supposed to contain. Part 8. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the lie that wouldn't die. In the annals of human hatred, few documents have proven as persistently destructive as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This fabricated text, created by the Russian secret police around 1903, purports to be the secret minutes of meetings held by Jewish leaders plotting world domination. Despite being definitively exposed as a forgery over a century ago, the protocols continue to circulate, inspire violence, and poison minds across the globe. Its enduring power lies not in any truth it contains, but in its ability to provide simple explanations for complex problems and to transform abstract anxieties into concrete hatred. The origins of the protocols can be traced to the fevered imagination of late imperial Russia, a society convulsing with revolutionary ferment and social upheaval. The document was likely compiled by Pyotr Ivanovich Rachkovsky, head of the Russian secret police's foreign branch in Paris, working in collaboration with Matvey Golovinsky, a conservative journalist and former revolutionary. These men were tasked with creating propaganda that could justify the Tsarist regime's oppression of its Jewish population and deflect blame for Russia's mounting social problems onto a convenient scapegoat. The protocols weren't created from whole cloth, but rather assembled like a literary Frankenstein's monster from existing anti-Semitic texts. The primary source was Dialogue in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, an 1864 French political satire by Maurice Joly that attacked Napoleon III's authoritarian rule. Joly's original text contained no references to Jews whatsoever. It was purely a critique of autocratic government. The Russian forgers simply replaced references to a despotic ruler with references to Jewish conspirators, transforming a work of legitimate political criticism into a blueprint for genocide. Additional material was lifted from Hermann Goediche's 1868 novel Biarritz, which included a fictional scene depicting Jewish leaders meeting in a Prague cemetery to plot world conquest. Gudska had written this as obvious fiction, but anti-Semitic propagandists had already begun circulating excerpts, as if they were factual reports. The protocols also drew from earlier anti-Semitic pamphlets and forgeries, creating a document that felt familiar to readers already steeped in conspiracy theories about Jewish power. The text itself presents 24 supposed protocols or minutes from secret meetings of Jewish elders. These protocols describe a systematic plan to undermine Christian civilization through control of the press, manipulation of financial markets, promotion of liberalism and socialism, and the orchestration of wars and revolutions. The ultimate goal, according to the fabricated document, is the establishment of a Jewish world government ruled by a king of Israel. What made the protocols particularly insidious was their blend of genuine social observations with paranoid conspiracy theories. The document correctly identified real trends in modern society, such as urbanization, the growth of mass media, and increasing economic interconnectedness. However, it attributed these complex historical developments to a secret Jewish conspiracy rather than to the broader forces of modernization and capitalism. This gave the forgery a veneer of plausibility that purely fantastical anti-Semitic claims lacked. The protocols first appeared in Russia in 1903, serialized in a newspaper called Znamia the Banner. Initially, the document attracted little attention, dismissed even by most anti-Semites as too obviously fabricated to be credible. However, The social upheavals that followed the 1905 Russian Revolution created a more receptive audience for conspiracy theories. When the protocols were republished in 1911 as an appendix to a book by Sergei Nilus, a Russian Orthodox mystic, they began to gain wider circulation. The Russian Revolution of 1917 and the subsequent Civil War created ideal conditions for the protocols to flourish. As the old order collapsed and Russia descended into chaos, many sought simple explanations for the catastrophe befalling their nation. The protocols provided such an explanation, portraying the revolution not as the result of decades of social tension and governmental incompetence, but as the successful implementation of a Jewish plot. White Russian forces fleeing the Bolshevik victory carried copies of the protocols with them, spreading the forgery across Europe and beyond. The document's international dissemination was facilitated by the social disruptions that followed World War I in Germany. Humiliated by defeat and economic collapse, the protocols found an eager audience among those seeking to blame their nation's troubles on external enemies, rather than acknowledging the consequences of their own actions. The forgery was translated into German in 1919 and became a bestseller, going through multiple editions and printings. Henry Ford, the American industrialist, played a crucial role in spreading the protocols in the English-speaking world. Beginning in 1920, Ford's newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, published a series of articles based on the protocols titled "The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem." These articles were later compiled into a book that was translated into 16 languages and distributed worldwide. Ford's endorsement gave the forgery a credibility it had never possessed, as many people reasoned that such a successful businessman must have access to inside information about global financial conspiracies. The protocol's impact on Adolf Hitler and the Nazi movement cannot be overstated. Hitler referenced the document multiple times in Mein Kampf, treating it as authentic proof of Jewish perfidy. The Nazis used the protocols as a cornerstone of their anti-Semitic propaganda, presenting it as evidence that the Holocaust was actually an act of self-defense against a Jewish conspiracy to destroy the German people. This inversion of victim and perpetrator became a central theme in Nazi ideology, transforming genocide into a supposed act of heroic resistance. The document's influence extended far beyond Germany. In the Arab world, the protocols were embraced as an explanation for the creation of Israel and broader Middle Eastern conflicts. The forgery was translated into Arabic in the 1920s and has remained in continuous circulation throughout the region. Many Arab intellectuals and political leaders have cited the protocols as evidence of Zionist conspiracies, even as they acknowledge that the document may be fabricated. This apparent contradiction reflects the protocol's function as a useful political tool rather than a source of historical truth. Despite definitive proof of their fraudulent nature, the protocols have shown remarkable resilience. In 1921, the Times of London published a series of articles by correspondent Philip Graves, conclusively demonstrating that the protocols were plagiarized from Maurice Joly's dialogue in Hell. Graves showed, paragraph by paragraph, how the Russian forgers had copied and modified Joly's text. This expose should have ended the document's influence, but it had no such effect. By 1921, the protocols had already taken on a life of their own, and their believers were not interested in evidence of their falsity. The pattern of exposure followed by continued circulation, has repeated countless times over the past century. Scholars have repeatedly demonstrated the protocol's fraudulent nature through textual analysis, historical research, and logical argument. Courts in multiple countries have ruled that the document is a forgery, yet it continues to circulate, adapt, and inspire hatred. This persistence reveals something disturbing about human psychology and the nature of conspiracy theories. Part of the protocol's enduring appeal lies in their flexibility. The document is vague enough to be applied to almost any situation where someone wants to blame Jews for social problems. During economic downturns, believers can point to the protocol's discussions of financial manipulation. During periods of social change, they can reference the document's claims about cultural subversion. During international conflicts, they can cite the protocol's descriptions of orchestrated warfare. This adaptability has allowed the forgery to remain relevant across different times, places, and circumstances. The Internet age has given the protocols new life and reach. Digital distribution has made the document freely available worldwide, while online communities have developed elaborate theoretical frameworks building on its basic premise. Modern anti-Semites have updated the protocol's claims to incorporate contemporary concerns about globalization, media consolidation, and international organizations. Some versions now include references to the United Nations, the World Bank, and multinational corporations as tools of the supposed Jewish conspiracy. Perhaps most disturbing is the way the protocols have been adapted by different groups to target their preferred enemies. Some versions replace references to Jews with references to Muslims, Freemasons, or generic globalists. This flexibility demonstrates that the document's real function is not to reveal any specific truth about Jewish people, but to provide a template for conspiracy thinking that can be applied to any unpopular minority or complex social phenomenon. The psychological appeal of the protocols extends beyond simple anti-Semitism. The document offers its readers a sense of special knowledge and importance. Those who believe in the protocols see themselves as members of an enlightened minority who understand the hidden forces shaping world events. This sense of insider knowledge can be intoxicating, providing believers with a feeling of superiority over the supposedly ignorant masses who accept the official version of events. The protocols also serve a psychological function by providing simple explanations for complex problems, rather than grappling with the difficult realities of economic inequality, political corruption, or international conflict. Believers can attribute all these problems to a single source. This simplification is comforting. Educational efforts to combat the protocols have met with mixed success. Teaching people about the document's fraudulent origins and the history of anti-Semitism can immunize some against its influence. However, true believers often dismiss such education as part of the conspiracy itself, arguing that efforts to debunk the protocols are actually proof of their accuracy. This creates a closed system of belief that is largely impervious to contradictory evidence. The continuing circulation of the protocols in the 21st century raises troubling questions about humanity's susceptibility to propaganda and conspiracy theories. Despite unprecedented access to information and education, millions of people worldwide continue to believe in or sympathize with the document's claims. This suggests that the appeal of conspiracy theories may be rooted in fundamental aspects of human psychology rather than simple ignorance or misinformation. Modern researchers studying the protocol's phenomenon have identified several factors that contribute to conspiracy theory belief. These include cognitive biases, such as confirmation bias and proportionality bias, psychological needs for control and understanding, social factors, such as group identity and in-group loyalty, and cultural factors, such as historical grievances and distrust of authority. The tragedy of the protocols lies not just in the hatred they have inspired, but in the opportunities they have cost humanity. Energy that could have been directed toward solving real problems has instead been wasted on chasing imaginary conspiracies. Resources that could have been used to build bridges between communities have instead been used to build walls. Lives that could have been lived in cooperation and mutual respect have instead been lived in suspicion and hatred. The protocols of the Elders of Zion stand as perhaps the most successful lie in human history. Not because of any truth they contain, but because of their ability to exploit humanity's darkest impulses. They remain dangerous, not despite being false, but because they are false in ways that feel true to those predisposed to believe them. Understanding their continued influence is crucial for anyone seeking to build a more rational and compassionate world. Part 9. The 9 Unknown Books of Ashoka. Forbidden knowledge sealed by a king. In the annals of ancient India, few figures loom as large as Emperor Ashoka Maurya, who ruled much of the Indian subcontinent from 268 to 232 BCE. History remembers him as a ruler who transformed from a brutal conqueror into a compassionate patron of Buddhism, renouncing violence after witnessing the horrific carnage of the Kalinga War. But according to certain legends, Ashoka's greatest act may not have been his conversion to Buddhism, but his decision to hide from humanity 9 books containing knowledge so dangerous that their revelation could destroy civilization itself. A British adventure novelist who wrote extensively about India in the early 20th century. In his 1923 novel, The 9 Unknown, Mundy claimed to be revealing ancient traditions about a secret society established by Ashoka to guard humanity's most dangerous knowledge. However, references to this mysterious organization can be found in much older Indian texts, suggesting that Mundy was drawing on genuine folklore rather than pure invention. How his own military innovations had enabled unprecedented slaughter in the Kalinga campaign. Determined to prevent future catastrophes, he allegedly gathered the most brilliant scholars, scientists, and mystics of his time, and tasked them with compiling humanity's most dangerous discoveries into 9 comprehensive volumes. These books were then sealed away, with each volume entrusted to a single guardian, who would pass the knowledge to a carefully chosen successor upon his death. The 9 unknown men, as these guardians came to be called, were sworn to absolute secrecy about the contents of their books. They were forbidden from sharing the knowledge with anyone outside their order, and were instructed to actively suppress any independent discoveries that might lead others to the same dangerous truths. According to legend, this society has continued unbroken for over 2 millennia, adapting to changing times while maintaining their sacred duty to protect humanity from itself. The 9 books supposedly dealt with different aspects of advanced knowledge, each containing secrets that could revolutionize human civilization or destroy it entirely. While different versions of the legend describe the book's contents somewhat differently, the most commonly cited subjects include psychology and its manipulation, physiology and the control of human bodies, microbiology and its applications, the transmutation of metals and advanced chemistry, gravitation and anti-gravity technology, cosmology and space travel, light and radiation manipulation, sociology and the control of human societies, and the rules governing the rise and fall of civilizations. The first book, dealing with psychological manipulation, was said to contain techniques for controlling human thoughts and emotions that went far beyond anything known to modern psychology. According to legend, this book described methods for mass hypnosis, thought implantation, and the creation of artificial personalities. The knowledge was allegedly so complete and effective that a single person possessing it could potentially control entire populations without their awareness. This book was considered perhaps the most dangerous of all, as its misuse could lead to the complete subjugation of human free will. The second book focused on human physiology, containing detailed knowledge about the human body that supposedly exceeded modern medical understanding by centuries. This volume allegedly described techniques for suspended animation, rapid healing, the extension of human lifespan, and methods for enhancing human physical and mental capabilities. Some versions of the legend claim this book also contained information about manipulating human genetics and creating biological weapons tailored to specific populations. According to legend, this book described bacteria and viruses that could be designed to target specific individuals based on their genetic makeup, as well as beneficial microorganisms that could cure any disease or even reverse aging. The book allegedly also contained information about creating entirely new forms of life through biological engineering. The fourth book concerned the transmutation of metals and advanced chemistry. This volume supposedly contained the secrets of alchemy, but presented them as advanced scientific principles rather than mystical practices. According to legend, the book described methods for transmuting base metals into gold, creating materials with impossible properties, and developing chemical compounds that could alter matter at the atomic level. Some versions claim this book also contained formulas for universal solvents and substances that could provide unlimited energy. Perhaps the most intriguing of all was the fifth book, which allegedly dealt with gravitation and anti-gravity technology. According to legend, this volume contained complete knowledge about the nature of gravity and methods for counteracting or manipulating gravitational forces. The book supposedly described flying machines that operated on anti-gravity principles, allowing for effortless flight and space travel without conventional propulsion systems. Some believers claim that ancient Indian texts describing flying vehicles called Vimanas were actually based on leaked knowledge from this book, containing detailed information about the structure of the universe and practical methods for interplanetary travel. According to legend, this book described other inhabited worlds, the principles governing cosmic cycles, and technologies for traveling between stars. Some versions claim the book also contained information about parallel dimensions and methods for accessing them. The seventh book dealt with light and radiation, supposedly containing complete knowledge about the electromagnetic spectrum and methods for manipulating light-based phenomena. According to legend, this volume described techniques for creating invisibility, generating powerful energy beams, and manipulating matter using focused light. The book allegedly also contained information about harnessing solar energy with perfect efficiency and creating artificial light sources that could replicate the properties of the sun. The eighth book concerned sociology and the manipulation of human societies. This volume supposedly contained complete knowledge about social dynamics, economic systems, and methods for controlling large populations through institutional manipulation. According to legend, the book described techniques for preventing wars, managing resources on a global scale, and creating stable societies that could last for millennia. However, it also allegedly contained information about destroying civilizations through social engineering and economic warfare. The ninth and final book dealt with the laws governing the rise and fall of civilizations. According to legend, this volume contained knowledge about the cyclical nature of human societies, the factors that determine whether civilizations succeed or fail, and methods for predicting and influencing historical events. The book supposedly described patterns in human development that repeated across different cultures and time periods, allowing for accurate predictions about the future of any society. Some British officials and scholars took the legends seriously, speculating that ancient Indian texts might contain scientific principles that Western science had not yet discovered. This interest was fueled by the undeniable sophistication of certain ancient Indian achievements in mathematics, astronomy, and metallurgy. During the 20th century, the legend took on new dimensions as believers began to claim that the 9 unknown men had been behind various historical developments. Some suggested that the society had secretly guided human progress, releasing small amounts of knowledge when humanity was ready for them, while suppressing discoveries that could lead to catastrophe. Others claimed that famous scientists and inventors throughout history had actually been members of the society, or had gained access to fragments of the forbidden knowledge. The legend gained particular traction during World War II, when both Allied and Axis powers became intensely interested in unconventional weapons and technologies. Some researchers claimed that Nazi Germany's advanced rocket technology and other innovations were based on knowledge leaked from the 9 unknown books. Similarly, some suggested that the rapid technological development following the war, including nuclear weapons and space travel, represented the controlled release of ancient secrets rather than independent scientific breakthroughs. Modern believers in the legend have adapted it to incorporate contemporary concerns about technological development and its potential dangers. Some claim that the 9 unknown men have been behind the development of the internet, genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence, carefully managing these technologies to prevent their misuse while allowing humanity to benefit from their positive applications. Others suggest that recent advances in quantum physics and nanotechnology represent knowledge that has been slowly leaked from the ancient books. The psychological appeal of the 9 unknown men legend lies partly in its suggestion that someone, somewhere, is actually in control of humanity's chaotic development. In an age of rapid technological change and global uncertainty, the idea that a secret organization of wise guardians is carefully managing human progress can be oddly comforting. The legend implies that apparent randomness and chance in historical development are actually part of a carefully orchestrated plan designed to protect humanity from its own destructive impulses. The legend also appeals to those who believe that ancient civilizations possessed advanced knowledge that has been lost or deliberately suppressed. This belief reflects a common pattern in human thinking that idealizes the past and assumes that earlier peoples must have possessed wisdom that modern humanity lacks. The 9 unknown books represent the ultimate expression of this belief, suggesting that all the knowledge humanity needs for unlimited progress already exists but is being withheld for our own protection. From a historical perspective, The legend of the 9 unknown men reflects genuine concerns about the relationship between knowledge and power that have existed throughout human history. The idea that certain types of knowledge might be too dangerous for general circulation is not inherently absurd. Modern examples include restrictions on information about nuclear weapons, biological warfare agents, and computer viruses. The legend simply extends this principle to an extreme degree, suggesting that an ancient ruler made a systematic effort to identify and suppress all potentially dangerous knowledge. Some researchers have suggested that the legend might be based on real historical practices. Emperor Ashoka did establish a vast bureaucratic system for governing his empire, and it's possible that this system included efforts to control the spread of certain types of information. Ancient Indian rulers were certainly aware of the potential dangers posed by advanced military technology and might well have attempted to restrict access to such knowledge. However, there is no historical evidence for anything resembling the comprehensive system described in the legend. The influence of the 9 unknown men legend extends beyond mere folklore into practical realms. During the 20th century, several intelligence agencies and research organizations investigated claims about the society, hoping to gain access to advanced technology that might provide military or economic advantages. While no credible evidence for the society's existence was ever found, these investigations demonstrate the legend's power to influence real-world decision-making. The legend has also inspired numerous works of fiction, scientific speculation, and conspiracy theories. Authors like Louis Pauwels and Jacques Bergier incorporated references to the 9 unknown men into their influential book, The Morning of the Magicians, helping to popularize the legend among Western audiences interested in alternative history and hidden knowledge. The story has since become a staple of conspiracy theory literature, often cited alongside other claims about secret societies and suppressed technologies. Modern interpretations of the legend have expanded to include claims about the society's involvement in contemporary global affairs. Some conspiracy theorists claim that the 9 unknown men are connected to other alleged secret organizations like the Illuminati or the Bilderberg Group, suggesting a vast network of hidden controllers manipulating world events. Others propose that the society has evolved to include members from different cultures and nations, maintaining its original mission while adapting to modern circumstances. The technological specificity of some claims associated with the legend raises interesting questions about the relationship between ancient wisdom and modern science. Believers often cite certain passages in ancient Indian texts that seem to describe advanced technologies like aircraft, nuclear weapons, or genetic engineering. While mainstream scholars interpret these passages as mythological or metaphorical, some argue that they represent garbled memories of real technologies described in the 9 unknown books. The legend's persistence in the modern era reflects broader cultural anxieties about technological development and its potential consequences. As humanity develops increasingly powerful technologies like artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and nanotechnology, the idea of wise guardians carefully managing such developments becomes more appealing. The 9 unknown men represent an idealized version of technological governance, where brilliant and benevolent individuals make careful decisions about what knowledge should be released and when. However, the legend also embodies troubling assumptions about the relationship between knowledge and authority. The idea that a small group of individuals should determine what the rest of humanity is allowed to know reflects profoundly undemocratic principles that conflict with modern values of transparency and open inquiry. The legend suggests that ordinary people cannot be trusted with certain types of knowledge, implying a fundamental inequality between the enlightened few and the ignorant masses. The practical implications of believing in the 9 unknown men legend can be problematic. If people believe that advanced knowledge already exists but is being deliberately withheld, they may become less motivated to pursue scientific research and technological development. Why struggle to discover new principles when the answers already exist in hidden books? This attitude can lead to intellectual passivity and a preference for conspiracy theories over genuine investigation. The legend also raises ethical questions about the suppression of knowledge. Even if we accept that certain types of information might be dangerous, who has the right to make decisions about what should be hidden and what should be revealed? The 9 unknown men legend assumes that such decisions can be made by a self-appointed elite without input from the broader population, a premise that conflicts with democratic principles and human rights concepts. Despite these concerns, the legend continues to evolve and attract new believers. In the internet age, discussions about the 9 unknown men have proliferated across online forums, social media platforms, and conspiracy theory websites. Some modern interpretations suggest that the books have been digitized and that fragments of their contents can now be found scattered across the internet, requiring careful analysis to piece together the original knowledge. The legend of the 9 unknown books of Ashoka ultimately serves as a mirror reflecting humanity's complex relationship with knowledge, power, and responsibility. It embodies both our deepest fears about the dangers of unlimited technological development and our most cherished hopes that someone, somewhere, is wise enough to guide us safely through the perils of progress. Whether viewed as historical fact, useful fiction, or dangerous delusion, the legend continues to capture imaginations and influence thinking about the nature of knowledge and its proper place in human society. Part 10. The Popol Vuh, the Voice of the Dead. In the misty highlands of Guatemala, where ancient Maya temples pierce clouds that have gathered for millennia, lies one of humanity's most enigmatic sacred texts. The Popol Vuh, known as the Book of the Community or Book of the People, stands as the most complete surviving creation myth of the ancient Maya civilization. Yet this is no ordinary religious text preserved in stone or pristine manuscript. It is a book that emerged from the ashes of cultural genocide, transcribed in secret by indigenous scribes who risked their lives to preserve their people's most sacred knowledge. What makes the Popol Vuh truly disturbing is not just its content, vivid accounts of gods who demand blood sacrifice and humans created specifically to feed the divine, but the circumstances of its survival and the strange experiences reported by those who engage deeply with its mysteries. The Popol Vuh that exists today represents only a fragment of what was once a vast corpus of Maya sacred literature. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the highlands of Guatemala in the 1520s, they encountered the Quiche Maya, one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas. The Quiche possessed extensive libraries of bark paper books containing their history, astronomy, religious practices, and prophetic traditions. These codices represented thousands of years of accumulated wisdom, carefully maintained by hereditary scribes and priests who had dedicated their lives to preserving their people's knowledge. The Spanish response to this intellectual treasure was systematic destruction, driven by religious fanaticism and convinced that indigenous books contained only superstitions and lies of the devil. Colonial authorities ordered the burning of Maya libraries. The most infamous of these cultural immolations occurred in 1562, when Bishop Diego de Landa ordered the destruction of thousands of Maya codices in the town of Mahani. De Landa later wrote that the Maya regretted to an amazing degree, and which caused them much affliction. This massive loss of cultural heritage represents one of history's most tragic episodes of biblioclasm, comparable to the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Against this backdrop of cultural annihilation, the survival of the Popol Vuh becomes almost miraculous. Sometime in the mid-16th century, indigenous scribes from the Caiche community of Chichicastenango undertook a desperate project to preserve their people's creation story, working in secret and facing potential execution if discovered. They transcribed the oral traditions and surviving fragments of the original codices into a single manuscript written in Caiche Maya using the Latin alphabet. This act of cultural resistance required not just courage but extraordinary literary skill, as the scribes had to adapt complex mythological concepts originally expressed in hieroglyphic writing to a completely different writing system. The manuscript these anonymous heroes created tells a story that is both beautiful and terrifying. The Popol Vuh describes multiple failed attempts by the gods to create suitable humans, with each unsuccessful race being destroyed in increasingly horrific ways. The first humans, made of mud, dissolved in water. The second race, carved from wood, was destroyed by a flood of boiling resin while being torn apart by their own tools and animals, which had gained consciousness and turned against their makers. The text describes this destruction in vivid detail, showing wooden people being crushed by grinding stones, pierced by cooking implements, and devoured by their former prey in a cosmic reversal of the natural order. The successful third creation involved humans made from corn dough, but even these beings posed problems for their creators. The original corn people were too perfect, possessing divine knowledge and sight that allowed them to see everything in heaven and earth. Threatened by their creation's godlike abilities, the divine beings deliberately dimmed human perception, clouding their sight so they could only see what was near to them. This creation story presents humanity as fundamentally flawed by divine design, beings deliberately limited by gods who feared their potential. Central to the Popol Vuh's worldview is the concept of reciprocal obligation between humans and gods. The text makes clear that humans were created not for their own benefit, but to serve as nourishers and providers for the divine beings. This nourishment took the form of prayer, ceremony, and most disturbingly, blood sacrifice. The gods require constant feeding to maintain their strength and continue their cosmic duties, and humanity exists primarily to meet this need. This relationship is presented not as exploitation, but as a fundamental law of existence, a cosmic contract that governs the relationship between the mortal and divine realms. The most famous section of the Popol Vuh recounts the adventures of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque. In their epic struggle against the lords of Xibalba, the Maya underworld, this is no simple tale of good versus evil, but a complex narrative about the necessity of death, the cyclical nature of existence, and the price required to maintain cosmic balance. The twins must undergo a series of trials in the underworld, including nights spent in houses filled with deadly challenges such as cutting, obsidian, jaguars, fire, and bats. Their eventual victory over the Death Lords comes not through martial prowess, but through trickery, sacrifice, and their willingness to die and be reborn. What makes the Hero Twins story particularly unsettling is its implication that their sacrifice was necessary not just for their own resurrection, but for the continuation of life itself. The twins' death and rebirth establishes the pattern for the daily journey of the sun through the underworld, ensuring that dawn will continue to come and that the world will not plunge into eternal darkness. This mythological framework presents sacrifice, including human sacrifice, as essential to maintaining cosmic order rather than as a barbaric practice. The Popol Vuh survived its creation by perhaps 50 years before being discovered by Francisco, a Spanish Dominican friar serving in Chichicastenango in the early 18th century. Unlike many of his contemporaries, recognized the manuscript's value and undertook to preserve it by creating a parallel Spanish translation alongside the original Caiche text. His decision to preserve rather than destroy the text was remarkable for its time, as most colonial authorities still viewed indigenous religious materials as dangerous remnants of paganism that needed to be eliminated. Preservation of the text was motivated partly by scholarly interest and partly by missionary pragmatism. He believed that understanding indigenous religious concepts would help him convert the Maya more effectively by allowing him to address their specific beliefs and concerns. However, his translation also reveals a deep respect for the text's literary qualities and philosophical depth. In his introduction, acknowledged that the Popol Vuh contained profound wisdom about human nature and cosmic order, even if it expressed these truths through non-Christian metaphors. The text remained largely unknown to the outside world until the mid-19th century, when French scholar Charles-Étienne Brasseur de Bourbourg discovered manuscript in the Guatemala City Archive and published the first European edition. Brasseur's publication introduced the Popol Vuh to international scholarship, but it also began a process of interpretation and reinterpretation that has continued to this day. Each new translation and analysis has revealed different layers of meaning in the text, suggesting depths of understanding that remain largely inaccessible to non-Maya readers. Modern scholarship has revealed that the Popol Vuh represents far more than a simple creation myth. The text functions simultaneously as religious scripture, historical chronicle, astronomical treatise, and philosophical meditation on the nature of existence. Recent analysis has shown that many episodes in the text correspond to astronomical events, with the adventures of the Hero Twins mapping onto the movements of celestial bodies through the sky. This astronomical dimension suggests that the text served as a complex mnemonic device for preserving not just mythological knowledge, but practical information about calendars and agricultural timing. Perhaps most disturbing for modern readers is the text's matter-of-fact presentation of human sacrifice as a necessary and beneficial practice. The Popol Vuh doesn't present sacrifice as cruel or unusual, but as a fundamental requirement for maintaining the relationship between humans and gods. The text describes various forms of sacrifice, from the offering of blood drawn from ears and tongues to the complete immolation of human victims. These practices are presented not as expressions of divine cruelty, but as expressions of divine hunger, needs that must be met if the cosmic order is to continue functioning. The continuing influence of the Popol Vuh extends far beyond academic study. Among contemporary Maya communities in Guatemala, the text remains actively sacred. consulted by daykeepers and spiritual leaders for guidance in understanding cosmic cycles and human obligations. Many Maya people view the Popol Vuh not as an ancient artifact, but as a living document that continues to provide relevant insights into the nature of existence and humanity's place in the cosmic order. This ongoing sacred status has led to some remarkable contemporary testimonies about the text's power. Modern Maya spiritual leaders report that deep engagement with the Popol Vuh can trigger visionary experiences, prophetic dreams, and encounters with the same spiritual entities described in the ancient text. Some claim that reading the text in its original K'iche' language, particularly in ritual contexts, can open doorways to other dimensions of reality or facilitate communication with ancestral spirits. Western scholars and spiritual seekers who have attempted to engage with the Popol Vuh as a living spiritual text rather than merely an object of academic study have reported similar experiences. Some describe vivid dreams featuring the hero twins or other characters from the text. Others report a sense of being contacted by spiritual entities that identify themselves as the same gods and spirits described in the ancient manuscript. While skeptics dismiss these accounts as psychological projection or cultural contamination, the consistency of certain types of experiences across different individuals suggests something more complex may be occurring. The text's influence on modern literature and popular culture has been profound, inspiring countless works of fiction, poetry, and art. Authors from Latin America and beyond have drawn on the Popol Vuh's imagery and themes to explore questions of identity, spirituality, and humanity's relationship with the natural world. The Nobel Prize-winning Guatemalan author Miguel Ángel Asturias incorporated elements from the text throughout his work, helping to introduce its themes to international audiences. However, this popularization has also led to concerns about cultural appropriation and misinterpretation. Many indigenous Maya intellectuals argue that the Popol Vuh cannot be properly understood outside its original cultural context, and that attempts by outsiders to use it for spiritual or literary purposes inevitably distort its meaning. They point out that the text is not simply an ancient artifact, but a sacred book that belongs to living communities with their own ongoing relationships to its contents. The Popol Vuh's treatment of death and sacrifice continues to disturb modern readers, particularly those from cultures that view death as an absolute ending rather than a transition to another state of existence. The text's matter-of-fact description of decapitation, dismemberment, and blood offering challenges contemporary sensibilities about the value of human life and the nature of divine benevolence. Yet these elements cannot be dismissed as primitive brutality. They represent sophisticated theological concepts about the nature of existence and the price required to maintain cosmic balance. The text's vision of humans as fundamentally created to serve divine needs rather than pursue individual fulfillment also challenges modern assumptions about human dignity and purpose. In the worldview of the Popol Vuh, human life gains meaning not through personal achievement or happiness, but through successful fulfillment of obligations to the gods and community. This perspective offers both profound insights into alternative ways of understanding human purpose and disturbing implications about individual autonomy and rights. The question of the Popol Vuh's ongoing spiritual power remains contentious. While academic scholars generally approach it as a historical document requiring critical analysis rather than devotional reading. Others argue that the text's true meaning can only be accessed through spiritual engagement. This divide reflects broader questions about the relationship between scholarship and religious practice, and whether ancient sacred texts can be properly understood through purely intellectual approaches. The Popol Vuh stands as one of the most remarkable books ever created, a text that emerged from the intersection of cultural destruction and preservation, oral tradition and written literature, indigenous wisdom and colonial violence. Its survival represents both a miraculous preservation of ancient knowledge and a testament to the courage of anonymous scribes who risked everything to ensure their people's story would endure. Whether viewed as mythology, history, astronomy, or active spiritual guidance, the Popol Vuh continues to challenge readers with its alien beauty and disturbing truths about the nature of existence, the price of cosmic order, and humanity's obligations to forces beyond the material world. Thanks for watching No Sleep Historian. Like and subscribe for more history they wanted you to forget, because some books aren't meant to be read, but remembered.